although we'll keep using the momentum principle all semester, this is the last time we'll focus on it in lecture for a while, because next week we'll start talking about our second fundamental principle, which is the energy principle. Today what we want to do is continue talking about this instantaneous form of the momentum principle. The rate of change of momentum at an instant is equal to the net force on a system at that instant. And do some reasoning about this, first qualitatively and then quantitatively. Eventually we want to get to a point where we can actually calculate some things. And our goal by the end of class is going to be to go back, think about Tarzan, swinging on the vine. We had some hints that the vine, that in order to turn momentum, a force has to be exerted. So this vine is not only holding up Tarzan's weight, but turning his momentum, and maybe it has to exert a bigger force than it did when he was just hanging there, and we'll be able to make this quantitative. So we started talking about this last time. One point I want to make about this form of the momentum principle, or any form of the momentum principle, but is that there's a couple important. This, of course, is a very compact mathematical notation that has a lot of information in there. Two things. Because it's a vector equation, we know that the direction of the rate of change of momentum is going to be equal to the direction of the net force acting on a system, and the magnitude of dp dt is going to be equal to the magnitude of F net. But these two quantities on this two sides of this equation are not the same thing. This equation doesn't say these two things are the same thing. It's really a cause and effect equation. It says this is the cause, there's a net force applied to a system, and the effect is that the momentum of the system is changing at that instant. So they're not the same thing, and we can consider them independently. There are times when we can figure out what the net force on a system is and therefore predict the rate of change of momentum. There are times when we can actually calculate the rate of change of momentum and therefore say something about the net force. If we know the net force, we may be able to resolve pieces of it, different pieces contributed by different systems. So that's the plan for today. Now, we've also seen that we've talked some about the fact that a force exerted along in the direction parallel to the momentum doesn't make an object turn. It can speed it up or slow it down, but it doesn't make it go that way. So the net force on this system, well, the spring is pulling up more or less, the earth is pulling down, the net force is going to be in a direction. We say parallel to the momentum of the mass. That means it could be in the same direction, it could be the opposite direction, but we mean along a line parallel to the momentum. It's not making this thing turn. In order to make something turn, we need a component of force perpendicular to the momentum. Now, we may have a component of force perpendicular and a component of force parallel, so that something's both turning and speeding up or slowing down, but in order to get that turning at all, we've got to have some piece of force perpendicular to momentum. And so what we're going to end up doing is dividing this equation, each of these sides, into two pieces. We're going to think about parts of the net force that are parallel to momentum and parts of the net force that are perpendicular to momentum. And likewise, dp dt, a component parallel, component perpendicular. This is something we can do. So if we have, here's some object, a rock flying through the air with some momentum. Let's say we have the net force. We're going to ignore air resistance, so the net force is just the gravitational force down. What's that force doing? It's doing two things. It's turning the momentum, so the rock is going to go in a curve. And it's also, at this point, changing the magnitude. It's slowing. So how would we draw this? Well, we can always express any vector as the sum of two other arbitrary vectors. So if we draw a vector, we can say here's a vector A, and I can write that as the sum of some vector B plus some vector C, and there's of course some infinite number of pairs of vectors you could do that with. What we're interested though is particular pair of vectors along particular directions. So we want components of this force vector that are along the direction parallel to the momentum and perpendicular to the momentum. And we can see that we can just do that graphically. We say, well, if we took a vector like that, that would be a force perpendicular to the momentum. And a vector like that, that would be a component of force parallel to the momentum. And if we add those two up, we'd get this gravitational force. And then we can say, oh, I see what's going on here. This component of the force is making the momentum turn, and that component of the force is slowing it down, decreasing the magnitude. So both things are happening simultaneously. Whereas if this were in outer space, we weren't near the Earth, here's a rock in outer space with some momentum p, and we attach a little jetpack to it, so it could exert a force only in the direction of the momentum. Suppose it's this little jetpack is exerting a force that way, it's going to speed up but not turn. On the other hand, if we attach the jetpack so it's exerting a force that way, then it's going to turn, but it'll still be exerting a perpendicular force. It'll keep turning and turning, so it should turn the momentum. So that's the basic idea, and we're going to try to be precise about this. So to start with, I want to look at a little movie. And I'm going to dim the lights so we can see this. So this is a movie made by a couple physicists at Rutgers. Eugenia Etkina is a professor of physics. She's going to roll a bowling ball, and David has a croquet mallet. And what he's going to try to do is to make the ball go in a circle. So I just want you to watch what he does to make the ball go in a circle, the force he's applying, and then watch what happens when he stops doing it, okay? So here we go. There goes the ball in a straight line, and now he comes along and keeps hitting the ball with delivering little impulses to it. And then he stops. Yeah, he got tired. Okay? So the question we want to answer here is, what did he have to do to get the ball to go in a circle? So here's our question. We just saw a video. David was applying impulses to the ball to make it go in a circle. What was the direction in which he had to apply those impulses to make the ball go in a circle? Okay, so 98% say that he had to apply impulses toward the inside of the circle to make the ball go in a circle. And that is indeed what we saw. So the ball is going along in this circular path, and he's running around looking a little bit like Charlie Chaplin, keeping on applying impulses toward the center of the circle to make the ball go in a circle. And when he stopped doing that, what did the ball's motion look like? Yeah, it was just a straight line after that, right? So it was going to go in a straight line unless he kept applying impulses. So it looks like we need, and this isn't really terribly surprising when you think of it. If you want to make the ball turn to the left, you apply an impulse to the left. Not a big deal.